I'm super excited to have Claus today joining us. Claus is a senior product manager here at Productboard, focused on the prioritization, job to be done, and features board. He's had a robust career, over 11 years working as a product manager. He's worked within marketing automation, power supply portals, professional imaging, editing applications, and video platforms. And outside work, he's a busy father of 2 girls, a portrait photographer, and dearly misses his former days as a death metal musician. Hence our wonderful love of music both of us care on that side. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Claus to share screen and get things started. And thanks very much, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you, Scott, for the amazing presentation, and great to see so many people here today. It's an honor to be here. So first of all, I'm sharing my screen now. A thumbs up.
Yep, no problems.
Awesome, that's great. So welcome to today's presentation, which is about the title Democratizing Prioritization. I'm going to talk a lot about how you include your stakeholders and how you make priorities transparent in your companies. And of course, I'm Claus Tørnes, as Scott just mentioned, senior PM here at Productboard, and primarily focusing on the prioritization and job to be done here at Productboard. And which is also why we're going to talk a lot about prioritization today. Because the synopsis is as follows. We want to, you can have a chance today to learn about transparency and stakeholder management, which are the ingredients in prioritization. And also, why is prioritization important? What are the pitfalls and what are the best practices when it comes to prioritization? And of course, how can you use Productboard to help you? Just a Slido question here, and that is, what is your current role? Just to get a feeling of who are we actually talking to today. And I would like to start this first Slido here. I'm, of course, myself a product manager here. All right. So we definitely see a lot of PMs. That's super great. There's a lot of other roles that's interesting. We see product leaders, a few designers. All right. Not so many from the other teams though. All right. Cool. But it definitely seems like we have the right audience today. So that's great. Let's continue. Why is prioritization important? So, and I just need to swap around here. There we go. You all remember or know, almost all of you know about this book, right? Written by Marty Kagan. It's a mandatory read here at the Productboard. And basically what he says is that feature teams deliver output, but product teams, they deliver outcomes. And he's very much focused about delivering outcomes is the most important part here. It's about delivering value to your customers. It's not about making or focusing on throughput, pushing out a lot of features that's never been tested or validated, that doesn't give any value or doesn't really impact anything on the business. And so this is mandatory, and a lot of our thinking here is based around this book, and of course a lot of other super good sources out there. One of his examples and one of his cases he always brings up is the Pandora example and the Pandora prioritization process. And most of you probably know the story about Pandora. They were super successful until 2013 or something, 2013, until they almost went bankruptcy in 2018. Basically because, and Marty Kagan highlights this, that it lacked prioritization, or the prioritization process lacked strategizing. And let's continue a little bit more on what is prioritization. So many define it as simple as this. Prioritization is the activity that arranges items or activities in order of importance relative to each other. Oh yeah, we heard that one many times, and it's the simple version of prioritization, right? And then we got the right score, which is also super good. Gives sense in very small companies until you get a little bit bigger, maybe. It's a good way to get started, but prioritization is much more than that. You have to think about top-down prioritization, so strategizing, creating a clear vision for your product teams, so they know where you want to go as leaders and execs, and where the company should go. And also it's bottom-up prioritization. It's really about having this continuous discovery process running, where you constantly talk with your customers, you constantly groom your PM backlog of ideas, and prioritize them. So you're always ready one day, if you decide as a company to pivot into another segment, you can easily do that if you have all this data. It's also about segmentation, of course. I almost revealed that one. So segmentation, we know it about when we talk about, okay, we are now targeting enterprises, right? Or we are targeting mid-market, or we are targeting a specific segment in consumer market. However, it's also about advanced segmentation. So are you also really focusing on your churn customers? Is it really, if there's a lot of churns, maybe you should focus your prioritization on churn segments as well. Or high value customers, if it's about keeping your high value customers on board. And it's of course also about finding a great balance between intuition and fact. So not getting stuck in facts, and also not getting stuck only in doing wild guesses, but finding somewhere in between that works out for you. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So why is prioritization important? Yeah, it's really about identifying bigger opportunities of how to win. It's also about risk and cost, reducing that. We all know the RISE score works a little bit towards that. Find big chunks of work and reduce it, minimize them, work on them to reduce the size, the risk, until you get something that is more easier to ship and understand. And it's also about, of course, creating team consensus and buy-in, which is something we're going to talk a lot more about later. And one of the most important things, I think, about prioritization. And of course, it's about achieving your business goals. So what are the pitfalls when it comes to prioritization? It all sounds so easy, right? But the truth is definitely different. So let's start with some facts here. The source for these facts are from our product excellence report. It's available via our website. And we have about 850 PMs attending and leaders attending in this survey. What we see is that 39% of all product managers, they mention that prioritizing the right products and features is a challenge. Why is that? Okay, let's dig a little bit deeper into that. Because yeah, leaders, we hear about 3 out of 5 product teams, they lack a clear vision or strategy of their product, where it's headed, and so on. And as leaders, there's really a big role here to fill out. Leaders must evangelize the vision and strategy, and really rally everyone around the why, right? So it's clear for all the teams where we want to go as a company. And just a pro tip here for how you can actually use Productboard for this to help you out. We have objectives in Productboard. You can easily just go in here, define your objectives, what you want to achieve, and you can, for example, use one of our new formulas, the RISE score in this case, to see, okay, what is the value actually coming from the users? What is the value of each of these features when you're constantly grooming your backlog? And you can go in and adjust the value here on some of these features we have in here. So using the value of the RISE score, for example, say, okay, we have the top one here, but okay, we have this feature here. It's only rated value of 1 out of 5. So if this is really the top, we could actually go in and set this higher, the value, and even maybe consider if this should be a must-have feature. So you can combine and use the value and outcome of your scores, where you do continuous discovery and constantly update your backlog, and use those scores to update your objectives in Productboard. To do some strategic fitness, right? Super important. Then we also hear that more than half of product teams believe that product decisions are based more on the whims of the CEO or other leaders out there, and rather on data and facts and so on. And there's definitely something about it, right? And then we see that 28% our product teams consider customer segmentation when setting priorities. And this one is super interesting. So segmentation, many interpret segmentation as only being, okay, we are building to enterprises and not to the mid-market or to the small, medium businesses. It could also be in the consumer segment where we are defining more pricier roles or more engaged audiences and so on. But that's the basics of segmentation, right? And only 28% of product teams consider that basic segmentation. So it's not even considering advanced segmentation where we are looking into segmenting by existing customers to reduce churn, or high revenue customers to keep the most valuable customers happy, or prospects to increase market share. There's a ton of ways you can segment your market, and the more you do it, and the more you think about it, the more efficient you become in your prioritization. So again, just a pro tip here again. We have a segmentation feature in Productboard. You can actually get the data directly from external sources. You can go in and define your segments, enterprise or top customers, where you do more rank segmentation. And you can go in and use these segments to actually identify, okay, what would each of these features impact be for this segment? You can then use that data to go in and basically affect your, for example, in this case, again, the RISE score, and say, all right, we definitely see that this feature here has a super high impact for top customers, etc. Let's definitely go in and adjust our impact. I know this is super simple use cases, but it's for understanding. Let's continue a bit here. All of these lead to this number, where we see that 69% of product managers and leaders, they mention that, that their features are not really well received by the customers. So it's about time we do something about this, right? As product managers. In addition, these are actually some true statements or real statements I've heard myself from product managers and leaders out there in various companies and so on. And one of them mentioning that I decide what to build next. That is a product manager mentioning that. And we'll get a little bit back to this one later again, because there's a lot of PMs out there prioritizing in isolation. Walk into a room, get a high level estimate from the developer, right? Put it into a RISE score and just tell the team to start from the top. So let's talk about stakeholders later, because that's definitely something we can improve. I heard the second one here, where there's a product leader mentioning, we don't have a prioritization framework. Our CEO decides what to build next. This was a 2,000 to 3,000 employee company with 5 product teams. And definitely we see that culture where CEO decides what to build next. It's the command and control leadership style, right? Where teams are not really getting motivated, where teams are not really part of figuring out how to solve the problem. And that can lead into not really delivering outcomes, but also in the worst case, people leaving the companies. Then there's this one where I have a customer success manager who basically said this, build this or else we'll churn. This is actually one I tried myself. And it's super hard. And if you don't make your priorities transparent to your teams, you will get these hiccups, how to say it, call it, from your other customer facing teams. If they don't know why do we prioritize as we do, it's hard for them to understand it, right? So you can save yourself a lot of time if you make your priorities transparent. And the last one, which is a product marketing manager saying, why was there a change in priority? So a little bit the same as the above one, again, about creating transparency and really getting your stakeholders and teams on board, why you prioritize as you do. To summarize, the prioritization problems, I'll just quickly walk through these, but overall we see there's there's definitely pain points where we see no strategic direction. I think we still have a lot to improve there. It's about creating a good vision, sharing it. It's about conflicting goals with stakeholders and no advanced segmentation. Then the second one is about inconsistent criteria. So there's no defined criteria on how to prioritize and definitions of how, okay, what is a reach? How big is your total addressable market actually? So a lack of actually aligning on how to prioritize, and of course, lack of stakeholder involvement, which is just one of these things we will visit today. The last one is lack of measurability, prioritization based on the gut feel, and then we see objectives that are impossible to quantify or measure. So that's really hard, right? When you get some objectives where you don't really understand, or there's no way to measure them, how can it even be an objective then? And then focus on outputs over outcomes. We already talked about that one. So just a few prioritization best practices here before I move into stakeholder management. Make sure you create and update your product strategy and vision, and update it on a regular basis and communicate it on a regular basis. It's super important, especially if you're a scaling company. Make sure you get your new employees on board where you're going. And yeah, people also forget, and people forget almost most of what you're saying every time. So repetition is just a good thing, especially as a leader. Go and repeat yourself. It's also about, of course, start with a product vision, create it, do segmentation, and prioritize high-level goals, prioritize your objectives and key results. Then organize the problem and feature backlog in one place. Yeah, set up a prioritization workflow. I'm going to show you a little bit about that. Break down your problems or your backlog into problems and break it down into maybe jobs to be done. So you have problems coming from your customers, but where you use jobs to be done as actually looking a little bit beyond what the customers are demanding, where you go a little bit beyond and say, okay, I see that PMs or this type of customers, they need to do this and that, but we're not really covering that. Maybe we should go that way. And it's also about breaking down big bets and high risks constantly to get more efficient, right? The earlier you do this in the journey, breaking down these huge chunks, the more efficient you will become down the line in delivery and so on. A pro tip here is, again, consider strategic fitness as a step one in your prioritization workflow. Let me just quickly show you this. So for example, in Productboard, you can go in here and set up a view where you only see all of the status new idea. And this is a super good way of actually getting more efficient, because why do you have to use a lot of time on prioritizing and doing advanced prioritization on features that will never become anything because they doesn't fit with your strategy? So this view here and this first step in a prioritization workflow could be to set up your objectives in this view where you have only new ideas, and then go in and check, okay, do they actually fit with our strategy at the moment? If they don't fit, well, if you're super hardcore, you can even go so far that you archive them. So do this and you do yourself a big honor. Let's move on. Prioritize in the relevant context. So it's very much also about continuously prioritizing your backlog against key drivers. I mentioned this a little bit before, doing continuous discovery, where you continuously meet with a lot of customers every week, talk to them, go in and use your insights to validate whether your prioritization of these features you update actually is still relevant, or if you need to change maybe the impact or change something. Very important that you continuously update and do bottom up. Then weigh in, of course, complexity and effort. To do some super simple return on investment. very important. And strategic fitness, cannot say this enough based on the numbers you saw earlier. We really need to up our game here, right, as PMs. And then it's about including key stakeholders. I'll get back to that one. Just one last pro tip here. You can actually also prioritize experiments to assess confidence and risk. And one super simple way of doing that is, don't make it too advanced. The drivers is super good for this actually, where you can go in and just have a confidence column, have a risk column, line up your experiments you want to do. Is it true? It has to be true that segment Y finds this desirable, something. And then you go out, do your validation tests. First, you of course prioritize your tests using this method. And then you go out and validate the most high risk experiments. So it's a super easy way to actually be more efficient in your discovery process. Last one here, last best practice advice is communicate reasoning behind plans. Visualize the key objectives. Really try to visualize them. Visualize the problems. If you can, use numbers. Quantify them as much as possible to motivate your teams. And then, of course, repeat yourself. It is so important. Communicating your plans once per year. Doing kickoff is not enough. Do it quarterly. People forget. And that's especially if you scale. And just one pro tip here as well. Give your key stakeholders a contributor access to your prioritization board. So if you have stakeholders that are contributing to your prioritization method in marketing or in sales, give some of these high managers or key managers access so they can see the priorities. And even comment on when you sit there and decide on priorities, you can even use the comments so you have a good documentation for why things are prioritized as they are. Let's get to it, including your stakeholders. So first of all, I have a new slide over here. I'll just enable it first so you can all vote. Just give me a second. So do you involve your stakeholders when prioritizing? Wow. Try to be super honest here. No one, it's anonymous. All right. I definitely see a lot of yes here. I also see about 40%, not doing it or considering it, which actually fits very well with one of our metrics here. Again, from our survey, where we see that 45% of product managers and leaders mentioned that aligning stakeholders around prioritization decisions is a challenge. It's not the same as saying as they don't do it, right? But there's definitely, and personally, I think this is one of the hardest things to do as well. And I got a few tips for you today how you can get started doing this. Let's dig into that. So including your stakeholders, don't do prioritization in isolation. But why? Because it is so important that you create what is called consensus when you prioritize. So sitting there, maybe around a desk, inviting your stakeholders. It could be one for marketing. It could be of course, your engineering manager, your designer, and so on. The triad is, of course, must have. But your marketing people or sales people, invite them. And creating this consensus is about, very much on having the same understanding of the problem. And then when assigning scores, also having the same understanding of why the reach is as the reach is defined. Maybe if you're using the right score, why we only think the impact is that high and not as high as the salesperson thinks it is, because this is the right thing that is burning right now because everybody will churn. So it's so important. You sit there with with your stakeholders, and you do this together, and that is creating consensus in the team and understanding. And at the end, if you're super good at this, you will also create buy-in. That is a little bit harder though. And at the end, everybody is saying that, okay, the product managers has to make the final call, right? But that's also a part true, but you need to make the call based on insights, right, and input. And sometimes your marketing people and sales people, they will sit with better information. So include them. Then it's about empowering teams. Yeah, inclusion, feeling that, and especially this one counts for the triad. I'm very much used to including my designer, my engineer, when doing especially minor features, but also features within a big discovery project. Sitting there and doing the first initial prioritization of the features together with the triad is super important. And it's giving them some, it's empowering them, it's motivating them. Then it's also about, of course, driving outcome and not output. So I'll talk a little bit more about later, advanced prioritization. And of course, the more advanced you make your prioritization, sometimes the more you reduce the risk and the more you are able to maybe deliver better outcome. But prioritization also has a cost. I'll get back to that. And it's about, this applies to all roles within product. It applies to the product managers, but also to the leaders and the execs. How to get started? Well, start with defining how to include your stakeholders. It might be that if you're a bigger product team, sit together, talk about inclusion, talk about how you want to include stakeholders first and align. There are multiple ways you can do this. You can allow stakeholders to listen in. So basically having a prioritization session with your triad maybe, or with your product team, where you allow somebody from marketing, somebody from customer success, and so on to listen in. Just listen in. So, and that way you create understanding, and they get this understanding of why we're prioritizing as we do. Another way to do this is to having them to contribute or comment. So again, sit in a room, do prioritization with your triad, for example, and having your stakeholders to actually allowing them to just chat a little bit, comment a little bit, give you some insights at the table. And the last one is, of course, allowing them to vote, giving them, for example, a driver column in Productboard and saying, all right, give me your input here and adding it to Productboard. So giving them a voice. One thing there to consider is, of course, where the product leadership has to really think about, okay, how do we weight these different drivers or scores? Maybe marketing is not as important, or maybe PR is not that as important as actually going in and prioritizing re-engineering projects and so on. So use weights sometimes if you involve stakeholders. And then, of course, next step is to identify your key stakeholders. Who are these people that are super important? And it can be very different from company to company. I mentioned a few of them: sales managers, but in general, managers is good, but however, they might not be the source for getting the right insights, or they might not be customer facing enough. So sometimes you have to consider also involving salespeople who is in direct contact with the customers all the time, and have a good feeling. And customer support, great source as well sometimes. Depends on, of course, again, your strategy. What are you prioritizing? Is it churn? Then definitely, customer support will be a super good stakeholder to have at the table. Then it's about the last point here is about instruct your stakeholders. So before you invite anybody, any stakeholders, you really have to be super sharp on how you prioritize and what are the decision criteria. So let's use something that everybody understands. Most of you probably the right score, right? So make sure that the reach is communicated. What is reach? What is the range? What is the TAM, or total addressable market here, that we can reach? Define that before you start gathering a lot of people into a room. So you can be efficient, right? And and people can start voting. They know the range. It goes super fast. Examples on voting here again. Yeah. First one here is assign each stakeholder to a driver or value, a marketing manager, sales manager, etc. You can define drivers in Productboard, or you can define your own criteria as well using formulas. You can go and create custom number fields. It could be PR impact, re-engineering, security, any kinds of drivers that would have an impact of your score that would be important to your objectives. And then it's the second one is, include the triad, as I mentioned before. Don't sit there alone as a product manager, prioritizing minor features or features within the discovery project. Really go in and include the triad. Your designer is really the best one should be the best one to sit there and give you some feedback as well on, for example, in Rise Again, the impact. How important will this feature actually be to your customers? The reach, of course, is very much in Rise is very much about market research, right? But again, it's good to have second opinions. And confidence is definitely something you should do as a team, and sit and weigh all of the information you have. Are we truly confident in the data we have to make this feature? And effort, of course. Yeah, I think everybody's doing that, right? Including your engineers for effort. You should. Then it's a pro tip here again. Use comments in Productboard to document key reasons. So why that? And the reason is simply that it's a good idea, because usually when you change priorities or something, us PMs, we are so busy and things just get lost. And it is super easy to just go and change priority, move on, and so on, until somebody asks you, why did you change the priority? Or teams that you have shared the view with your stakeholders, they just see change, but they do not see why. So it's a good idea to go in and comment. If you change the reach from something to another number, just comment, okay, we changed it from 5,000 to 10,000 because we got better data, or blah, blah, blah. You can definitely go in there and document the reasoning. And it's especially super helpful when you, as I mentioned before, share a view with your stakeholders. They can go in and read the comments. Again, a small slide over here. Let me just enable it again. So how do you include your stakeholders when prioritizing? All right, cool. So we need a little bit more to vote here. 8. Okay, we definitely see a lot allowing the stakeholders to actually contribute and comment. That is super nice. We see other, that is pretty high. I would love to get more information out of that one. Maybe at the end when we have questions, I would really love if somebody could mention how they do it. Yeah, vote. Interesting. And 5% not including stakeholders. Awesome, awesome. This is great. This is great. Super good insight. One final tip here is that, is it time to change how you work, how you prioritize? A good rule of thumb here is that always measure the success of your features. Go in and measure retention, adoption, activation, and set some goals before you, of course, launch. And does it really, does your feature actually live up to your goals? and what you expected. Of course, if you don't have a good baseline, that's another thing. But this could also be a sign of that maybe your vision or strategy is not right, or it's not well communicated. It could also be a sign of that your prioritization method is not tailored to your business. A lot of people and companies out there is still just using the RISE score and have been using it for a lot of time and thinking this is good. But it could be that there is actually some other criteria you have to consider instead of just the reach, impact, confidence, and effort. Go and think a little bit about, okay, how does these numbers actually fit with our strategy and so on. Again, I'll talk a lot about churn. If it's about really making sure that you're reducing your churn in the company, maybe you should consider including that as a factor in your prioritization score. So yeah, tailor it to your business. If you can afford it. I'm going a little bit back to that, or coming back to that in the next slide. And then maybe you need to include your stakeholders while prioritizing to get more insights, right? But yeah, how advanced do you actually need to be? And yeah, it depends. It depends on maturity. It depends on organization, the market you're in. So a lot of different factors plays in. If you're a small company, my advice would be to you get started. It's better to have something, get started with prioritization than doing nothing. It might be that you're totally off with prioritization, but if you also involve your stakeholders, you're also creating a much more efficient team. So yeah, start simple, maybe with a super simple return on investment or the RISE score, and then advance from there on. But remember, making very advanced assessment scores, etc., has a high cost. And especially if you think about discovery projects, yeah, start super simple in the beginning of your discovery projects. Don't use too much time on features that will never become anything. And then advance from there on when you have selected some ideas and matured them, and then prioritize them again using a more advanced prioritization method. So yeah, remember one rule of thumb here as well: don't use more time on prioritization than actually talking to your customers. I've seen companies out there where the processes and prioritization processes are so complex that the PMs ended up using a lot of time on it, and don't get stuck in that. Tried it myself. It was a good learning. Talk to your customers. That is the most important part. So you get data in that will help you to actually prioritize faster. And then of course, balance intuition versus fact, where intuition, yeah, you cannot only base things only on intuition. It will be super hard for you to create buy-in, etc., unless you're a super good salesperson. Of course, there are those people, but have some fact to minimize the risk and to create better outcomes. So Scott, we're at the end here, and I think there's some questions.
All right, sounds good. I'll come back up here, and we're going to dive into our Q&A here a little bit. So Amanda's got a question here. Any suggestions on how to create consensus with stakeholders when there are thousands of them and we can't all sit around a table?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Kind of that big prioritization challenge that we all face.
Yeah, that's of course 1,000 of stakeholders. Now I don't know the industry and the organization, but again, I think there's something about there maybe to structure as well. Yeah, it also depends on how you're structured. But again, pick some of the best ones who are best to contribute, or find those people who has the best insights and so on. For example, as I mentioned before, it doesn't necessarily have to be the managers. It could also be the individual supporter having most time with the customers. That these people might have the best insights. But yeah, usually you pick managers for some of these security and parameters and so on.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because like I always think of the challenge in that is also the word consensus.
Yeah.
Because I think part of the challenge too is we treat prioritization as a consensus activity, And instead, actually, it's an input gathering activity. It's a signal to the PM. But ultimately, the PM ultimately owns the decision of, is it valuable and is it viable and worth doing? Yeah. And we have to own those decisions and those outcomes, right? Versus maybe trying to lean in too much into the consensus building kind of activity.
Super good point, Scott. Yeah, and at the end, yeah, as you mentioned, the PM is sitting and making the final call on definitely on validation or validating the viability of a feature, right, or a product or initiative. And basically, all of the other insights you're getting is accumulated into that final validation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Another question here from Mafadal. Any suggestions on what tactical methods can be used to involve stakeholders? Providing contributor access is one way, but feedback sometimes lost in comments. How do we democratize prioritization?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of other ways you can do it. One of them being that you can, of course, set up this group and invite a group of people, as I mentioned before, to come in and actively contribute. You can even do, if you're a big enterprise, you can do multiple groups. You can make it themed prioritization within different drivers, within security and etc., and then accumulate all these scores. So again, it comes down to, can you afford it? Do you have time to do this versus talking to customers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Another question here is maybe continuing on the theme of consensus a little bit, but aside from data, what else do you need to build consensus with engaging stakeholders for prioritization?
Sorry, Scott, I didn't get that one.
Aside from data, what else do you need to kind of use to build consensus or to engage stakeholders when bringing them on board for prioritization? Maybe some tips you've got to share there.
It's definitely about sharing, right, and communicating your bigger plans continuously. Yeah, share your roadmaps on an organizational level. Maybe even if you do some of your discovery projects, share some of the outcomes and share why you're focusing on these experiments instead of others. So it's about transparency, right? Creating transparency on what is going on and why you make the decisions you do.
Yeah. I think a lot of, maybe your experience here too, is like you see product teams and product orgs that, to your point, don't communicate regularly, don't communicate with enough frequency, but also don't help the business understand essentially where they're focusing and where they're not. And if you think about your kind of communication journey in this, like, how do you get over that hurdle? Like, how do you get better at that? Is it just a muscle you need to practice, or is it maybe other techniques or things like that you found kind of valuable on that side?
Good one. It is definitely trial and error and practice, a lot of it, right? Building up your experience here as well, and of course talking to your PM stakeholders, getting advice and upping your game via them.
Yeah. Okay. Another question here.
Joining the product community.
Yeah, exactly. What should be the balance between business objectives and customer needs when prioritizing?
That is a super good question. I actually think we saw another survey one day where we could see that majority prioritize using based on business objectives and not so much on desirability and all that. So that those are the stats. It's like 70-30 or something. 70% using business metrics and not user needs when prioritizing. So it depends again where you're going. I think there should be a good mix, a good balance. So including a little bit of all is important.
Yeah. I think I come back there to the valuable, viable parts of Marty Kagan's 4 risks.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like, the business objectives is the, viable for the business, and the valuable is important to the customer. And if we're not balancing both of those, we're not essentially going to get the outcome we need.
Because you cannot only build to what your customer is asking for, right? You also have to make sure that it's aligned with where the business is heading and where you want to, how you can grow the business, right? So are you on a growth path? Are you on a churn path? You need to save the business. It's those factors pays in what features you have to build. So yeah,
that's great. Question for Jeff regarding customer interviews. Do you recommend that they occur one-on-one or within a group with like several customers at a time?
Sorry, I didn't get the first part of that question.
Like for customer interviews, do you recommend that they more like are done like one-on-one with the customer, or that you bring in a group of customers or several customers at a time to interview them?
Again, it depends on the sensitivity of information, and remember not to bring in competitors, but definitely have some bigger groups of customers in one room, sharing problems, going through their feedback, maybe even solving problems or ideation on problems. That's a good idea. And especially if you do that and start with doing that, you'll find some really good candidates you can include in other group discussions or focus groups later on. Maybe even starting an advisor board later, where you can include some of the best contributors and having them to ideate on problems or help you out or bring insights even to an advisor board. That is super, super helpful and insightful.
Yeah, so I think sounds like not a preference for either approach. It's more about picking the right approach and finding the right group of people than maybe like one method over another on that side. Okay, so hopefully that helps on that end. There was another question here, maybe in follow-up to the question I answered. Other two involve stakeholders that I'm trying to make sure I can paraphrase this. The question I answered, other two, involve stakeholders that are near to me, lateral core product team, have them contribute comment. But if leadership C-suite is involved, make them vote on competing priorities or limited resources. I'm not quite sure I quite understand the question here, Galen. Maybe it was a piece of feedback or input, but if you want to clarify or maybe add a little bit more color on that, or I'd be happy to bring you on screen too if you want to answer that question or ask that question, maybe live, but would need some more detail here probably to answer that one for you. Another question here was, how do you deal with stakeholders forgetting their prior agreements? So they've maybe committed to this kind of prioritization, this kind of outcome. How do you do that?
A good way to do it is, again, to use the comments for documentation, maybe, or if you can even record the sessions if you want to go that far. But at the end, there should be trust, right? You should be able to trust each other. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll bring Galen on here to talk. Galen, you can go ahead and share your question maybe out loud. It'll be a little bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so I was adding clarity to that question. How do you include your stakeholders when prioritizing? And so it really depends, right? If my stakeholders are lateral to me in the organization, so maybe it's my lead developer, my lead of design, and the core PM team of developers, designers, and maybe my own manager or Skip for that matter, then have them contribute and comment. They're more actively engaged with the product. But if it's like more higher up the stack and like a product leadership position where maybe the CMO is a core stakeholder, I'll gather like the C-suite together and have them go through a voting exercise on what the priorities are after having gone and refined that priority list within the PM team first. So that was that question to the other.
Okay. Right. And a super good idea with bringing in the C-level. I did the same actually once. That can be very efficient, but yeah, once you start to become a bigger company, it can be a challenge, right? Because they might be missing insights on
detail. Getting them in the same room at the same time is
that's also
the hardest part.
Then we got Zoom. Yeah. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Galen.
Yeah. There was when I did one of the sliders, there was some people mentioning that they had other ways to include their stakeholders when prioritizing than just voting or having them to contribute or comment or listen in. If there's anybody who's happy to come up and talk a little about how they prioritize, they're super more than welcome. That would be interesting. If you can write in the chat first, let me know who you are.
Yeah, not seeing anybody want to volunteer on that one so far.
That's also okay.
All right, that's all fine. No problem. You can always reach out to us through our community, and Claus and I are both in there. We'll be happy to hear your thoughts on that
Yeah,
side.
reach out to me directly. That would be super awesome. I would really like to hear how you could involve your contributors.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask one maybe last final question before we kind of wrap things up, but getting maybe super meta here, but you as a PM here at Productboard, building software for product managers who are building software using Productboard for their customers, it gets super kind of meta very fast, but what are some of the ways and some of the choices that you have to make? What are some of the inputs that you like to include personally when you're making decisions about what to build for Productboard?
Yeah, again, it depends on what it is we're prioritizing, but high level, we do definitely strategic fitness against our targeted segments and objectives. And we are focusing on different segments and prioritizing them. So prioritizing your segments is up against your objectives. Number of minor features, yeah, I mentioned a little bit before, Scott, and it's the thing about really a lot of good gurus out there talking about the triads, right? And I think you really have to include your triad as a minimum when you do prioritization, so they have the understanding as well. But yeah, again, when you're prioritizing experiments, include your triad. That they are part of it, right? And they sit with their opinions and how they interpreted your interviews with the customers and so on. And when you're sitting and doing prioritization, that is really where the discussion comes up, right? And where you need to align. And when you do that, then you align, you start to create consensus, and yeah, becoming a good team.
Yeah, someone's asking a question what we're referring to when we say the word triad, but I mean, fundamentally, I'll answer that for you. It's really the product manager, designer, engineer, typically, or that lead engineer function is typically what they feel is the triad. You often see it, often hear it called a trio in some cases. I think Christina Wadkey and also Teresa Torres call it a trio, I think, or something like that. But a few other variations of it. There's even sometimes versions of it that are like 3 amigos or 4 amigos. I've heard those kind of things expressed before.
That's a new book every week, right?
Yeah, there's definitely some, but it's that pairing and that relationship that's so critical on that side. Yeah, cool. So thank you very much, Claus. That was super interesting.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, really, really great. I'm going to just close things off with a few notes here. Again, really welcome everybody contributing to our post-event survey. We utilize this both, as a speaker to get our speaking thoughts and our conversations better, but also to run better events for you here in our product makers community. The chance to win some of our monthly prizes as well on that side, and encourage you to take the time to enter. If you do have further questions, things you want to learn about, we didn't get a chance to get to them today in the hour that we've got, feel free to open a new topic inside our community. We'd be happy to continue the conversation or discussion there. And we've got lots of great events coming up. Nicholas Giametta is joining us on June 30th, and Isla Barado on July 14th, Kara Zucker on July 28th. And then we've got some events as well in September after we take a little bit of a breather in August on the event side of things, with both Chris Daniel and JJ Rory joining us first off to get things off. Other ways you can get involved in the community too, if you haven't had a chance yet, you can join our new mentoring program that kicks off in July. That happens every quarter. Our roundtables, which happen every month. Our Meet a Maker program, which happens every other week. It's a chance again to meet other people in the community. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you've got a chance maybe to share some of your experience, your expertise, things that you want to talk about or really passionate about, we'd love to have you as a speaker here within our different events. With that, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you again, Claus, for everything today.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for attending.